inspired.
It's great to be here. The last Labor Party conference I was at, Mark Latham was the leader. That was many leaders ago. So today what I'm going to talk about is a little bit about the research that I do. So I'm the director of the Ipsos Mackay report, which is Australia's longest running social trends report. It's been going for 33 years, and it was established by Hugh Mackay, who is now semi-retired, and I took over as director 5 years ago. So what do we do? What kind of research we do? So I'm not a pollster. I'm not somebody who does a lot of quantitative research. So what I'm going to talk about isn't going to give you percentages, like this percentage of Australians thinks this, but it is going to talk about consistent themes that come up in the research that we've done for the last 5 years. So how do we conduct our research? Well, I have a team of 4 people. Every 7 weeks we go all around Australia, different suburbs, different country towns, and we talk to, well, importantly, we listen to groups as diverse as a whole lot of 18-year-old girls from Sans Souci to a whole lot of 75-year-old ex-truck drivers from Townsville. Needless to say, I drink a lot of bad cups of tea, and I see a lot of Australia. And we sit in their lounge rooms, and importantly, we get people who know each other very well. They've all got to be very close friends. And as a result, when I arrive, they're almost always drunk. So in wine there is truth, and the idea about our research is that because they're friends, because they're at home, and because they're half cut, they will tell us really what they think. The other thing that's important about our research is that we don't come to our research with a whole series of questions. We don't say to them, what do you think about the carbon tax? What do you reckon about Julia Gillard's pantsuits? We don't do any of that. We literally say to them, what have you been talking about with your friends and family over the last 6 weeks? And it's important that you tell us what you have been talking about as opposed to what you think you should be talking about. And it is a reasonably foolproof method of research, and I'll give you an example. During the entire time that the ETS was an alive issue in Australian life, it was never discussed once in one group. In one group that we did that the whole time, but when it was dumped, it was talked about. At the moment, everybody wants to talk about the carbon tax, and I have some views about why that's the case. And today what I'm going to do is talk to you about what are the issues that come up in the groups that we talk about, what are the issues that don't come up, and what might be the implications for a Labor agenda going forward. The first thing I'd say is that, look, even though most Australians think that we didn't have a global financial crisis, and most of them have different views about why we avoided that, there is a significant mood shift because of the global financial crisis in Australia. The first aspect of it is a reassertion amongst Australians that we need to have strong government control of financial institutions. That is the one thing, as well as the resources industry, which I'll talk about in a minute, that Australians said we had our banks under control, we didn't have out-of-control lending, and that was because of the government. There is some anger that particularly some of those people that caused the global financial crisis in America haven't been prosecuted. There's Australian anger about that. You know, those people should actually be put in jail. But the biggest complaint that people in our groups have is that when Kevin Rudd said, look, we need to get through this by employers trying to keep employees on the payroll, and by employees doing the right thing by not asking for pay rises, not asking for training, maybe cutting back on hours. Australian employees did that, and they now say, when are we getting our return for the work that we did? We talked to lots of people who went down 4 days a week or cut back on overtime, or really thought, okay, we're in this together. And now, because Australia didn't actually have a recession and they continue to see Australian companies do well, they say, well, where's our pay rise? Where's the stuff that we really need to get? This is why there's continuing anger over increasing costs of various things. Now, because people are pretty cynical about whether or not they're going to get that stuff from employers, what they've been doing, well, they've been saying that they've been doing, and there's some evidence that this is actually happening, is actually cutting back on a lot of extra work. They say, you know, if I'm not going to get this pay rise and they don't give a fuck that I went down to 4 days a week, I'm going to go home at 6 o'clock. I'm not going to just hang around. I'm going to be with my kids. And in fact, last year, as I understand it, was the first year in some time that unpaid overtime in Australia levelled off. We've continued to see it go up and up and up. And my sense is that Australians are going, I don't want to do this anymore. And the other thing that they're doing, and you know, all of my corporate clients are up in arms about this, is they're not spending as much as they used to, and they're worried about their credit cards and they're saving more. I do say to my corporate clients, isn't this a good thing? No, it's not a good thing. I think, you know, they're kind of being more fiscally responsible. No. And I actually think, I mean, there was an interesting point that was made by Louise. It's that the GFC was perhaps our opportunity not to talk a little bit more about markets and about consumption and the rampant consumerism, but consumers are talking about this. They're saying that is not the path to a good life, and they're thinking about different ways in which they can rethink consumption, and for some of it's an environmental issue, for others it's an ethical, moral issue. I want to teach my kids that they just can't buy without any implications for the future. The other thing that was so interesting to me about the GFC is that there was widespread Australian resistance to the idea of consumer handouts. Everybody took the money, don't get me wrong. I did groups where women came and said, this is the handbag Kevin Rudd bought for me. And people would say, oh, has your money arrived? No, it's not arrived, but it will arrive, and this is the bag that he bought me. But generally there was a sense of they shouldn't be encouraging us to spend more. I mean, this is economic illiteracy, of course, but it was a sense of, shouldn't we be investing this money in infrastructure? And there was, in fact, enormous support for infrastructure spending, and nowhere near the amount of anger in our groups about the BER that there was in the Australian. I mean, that's not much to say. I mean, really, the Australian were pounding something that we just didn't find in groups, which is like, okay, yeah, this didn't happen there or this didn't happen there, but actually, if we were going to have a stimulus, it needed to be investment. The one area that Australians felt should have been more invested in was other kinds of infrastructure, particularly transport. They thought that was a missing piece of the puzzle. So that's a little bit about the GFC. The other thing that interests me, and continually interests me, is that throughout, in pretty much every single group, regardless of where they're from, age, gender, background, for the last 5 years, the one issue that has come up, well, the two issues that have come up consistently is renewable energy and water. So the whole concept of climate change is off the agenda. It doesn't get talked about anywhere near as much as it did in 2007. But even at the one report that we did where people were very concerned about where the unemployment rate was going to go, and there was a sense of depression about that we are headed towards a recession, it was still mentioned as important, and it's even still being talked about. Proper water infrastructure and investment in renewable energy is something that comes up all the time, and I call them essentially organic issues because they're not media-led. A lot of issues that we talk about are media-led, but they continuously sit there as important issues. And I remember once I was in Werribee. Anybody here from Victoria? Werribee with a whole lot of sparkies. They were very drunk when I arrived there. All had kids. And they were talking about renewable energy, and they all said, you know, the day of the V8 is over. I'd like a tax credit for driving a small car, you know, and they said, you know, we can't rely on coal for the rest of our lives. They were saying all those kinds of things. These are guys who, you know, basically used to spend a lot of their weekend tooling around with cars, and they'd come to terms with the fact that that wasn't going to happen. So you kind of get it across all kinds of groups. The other thing that's so interesting too, and there's been an escalating question about this, is Australians are concerned about what's going to happen when the mining boom ends. There's a sense that we've invested too much in the quarry, and whilst they believe that the resources industry protected us from a recession, there is serious concern about how invested we are in it. The general tenor of the conversation is, we've fucked our manufacturing industry, we're too reliant on resources, we won't have a retail industry if we don't deal with this whole online shopping thing. Who is going to employ our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren? And why aren't we investing in industries that are going to take over when the mining boom ends? And to me, that meant that there was at least a kernel of public opinion support for something like a mining tax. Something about how do we take all of these resources and the prosperity that we have now to build something in the future. Now, I think it was, I won't make any comments about how that was solved, but that is a continuous question in all of our groups. There is a slightly, I wouldn't say xenophobic, please explain, kind of part of it. I'd say that there is a concern that we're too reliant on China. That is definitely a concern amongst people, but more broadly that we've invested too much in the mining boom. The other big issue that comes up continuously, and this has really eclipsed cost of living concerns, particularly over the last 2 years, is just basically building better cities, building more livable places, better transport, better local community services, rewarding or restricting car use, flexible working hours. And it all boils down to people saying, I've got to get up at 7 o'clock and be out of the house by 7:30 so that I don't get stuck in traffic, but I do get stuck in traffic and I still have to pay a toll, and kids arrive at childcare or school late, then I arrive at work late, and then I have to leave work with my boss kind of glaring at me because I'm leaving work on time to try and get home in time to pick up my kids from school, which is okay, but childcare is worse because the childcare workers are standing there while my kid's standing in front of them and asking me for $5 because I'm 10 minutes late. That's really the constant thing that comes up in our groups, and it's about how do we build better workable cities to make that less like a complete mess.